run into trouble with is that they're breeding, and they're then you've got evolution happening where you've got variations and you've got mutations happening, and so it's quite possible that your culture may not be the carefully managed culture that Y-Lab's put together, and you've now got this sort of mutated thing because you've grown it yourself in a not very controlled environment. Further to that, if you underpitch in a large batch of yeast, yes, it will grow, it will build up, but you also, if it's a killer strain or something, that's all well and good. But if there isn't enough of it there, you could start up other colonies of wild yeasts that can then compete until such a point as it grows to a population where it can wipe out the others. So you run this possibility of not dominating the must with the yeast that you want to dominate it with, which is why you should always pitch, an appropriate, or as I do, extra amount.
Well, that's a perfect segue to where I was. You didn't know this, but I was heading there.
Cool.
If by the time the mama gets to Mama 10, Mama 10 is already, when Mama 1 is very tiny. Mama 2 is just a little bit bigger. Mama 3 is a little bit bigger than that. And by the time they get, I think it's to Mama 10 or 12, that baby is born the same size as the mama.
Okay.
They find then that when that Mama 12, 13, 14, and on down, those mamas can only make 4 or 5 mamas before they don't make any more mamas. So that one thing you didn't realize, Hamish, when you were talking about, okay, eventually the biomass is going to stop growing altogether. This is one thing, when I first realized this just one day on my own, I was so flabbergasted I couldn't talk for a little while. Do you realize that at any given time throughout your entire batch of mead, half of the yeast cells in there are brand new Mama 1s?
Well, yeah. As long as they're still reproducing, which is...
Well, they will continue to reproduce, but they will continue to reproduce because every other time, every reproduction cycle, half of what was just made anew are brand new. A fourth are Mama 2s, an eighth is Mama 1 or 3s, and so forth. So it will reproduce, except that if you have now a whole bunch of Mama 20s making babies, they can only make a few babies before they can't make any more, and then that eventually what leads to the mutation that you were talking about.
Right.
So can somebody pitch a single 5 gram packet of meats into 40 gallons of wine? Yeah, but by the time you get to the end of your sugar in that 40 gallons, your yeast they're not making what they were when you first started out.
And it may not be quite the same yeast.
Exactly, and they won't be producing the same esters and fusels, right?
That's right. Yeah.
All right, so that's why pitch rates are important. Let's go back to Dogfish Head, and they figure out how much sugar they got to chew up. And I don't know how they figure this out. I'm not that guy that don't know how to read my hydrometer like my thing says on my avatar. But I'm not that good at math to try to figure that out. But they can figure out how much yeast they have to throw in there so that the sugar's gone by the time that Mama's at Mama 6. And they do that intentionally so that they get good, clean ferments that taste like the yeast that they're using. And so we need to do the same thing. That packet says it's good for 5 gallons of wine. That's a wine that's at probably 1060, 1070. It's got all the nutrients in the world. It's not a very high gravity. The pH isn't that high, and it's not going to swing that much once the yeast go into action. And so Lalvin on page, I don't remember, Anyway, in there it tells us. It tells us how much yeast should you use, and they don't go by volume. They go by gravity. The higher the gravity, the more yeast you need to use. And so then their chart breaks down to this, that if you're from 0 to 1106, you need 0.9072. So let's just call that a gram. You need 1 gram per gallon until you get to 1102, 1106. And then from 1106 to 1129, you need 1.3 grams per gallon. 1129 to 1154, then you need 1.49. And 1154 to 1189, you need 1.92. Sergio over on Mead Made Right says that you should use 2 grams of yeast per gallon, and I totally agree with that. I was doing that because it says it right here in the stuff. I was that's right. I tell people you could use 1 5-gallon pack for 5 gallons, but I wouldn't recommend it. And there's a couple other reasons too. The more yeast that we pitch at the very beginning, the faster we get through lag phase. The faster we get through lag phase, the faster they go to work and to start reproducing, which then means there's a bigger army in there now to kill off any of the bad guys that jumped in by accident or by intention before the war started up. When I read people saying, I had a lag time and I pitched my yeast 2 days ago, I'm just cringing inside going, oh my God, and they still don't see anything going on. Or sometimes they'll say, I pitched 10 days ago and nothing's happening. I want to say, I don't, but I want to say you just should toss that out.
Well, I figure anything, if it's gone more than about 48 hours and you're not seeing any activity, then you need to repitch. And probably if you pitched once and you know your package wasn't a dud, then you should make a starter. And I'm also of the opinion that if you're going to pitch anything over about like 1.120 or anything like that, then I make a starter for anything that's a starting gravity higher than that, because it's just that much more stress on the yeast. And I'm also going to do an acclimated starter so that I'm introducing must into the starter before I add it to the big batch.
I've been doing that.
Absolutely.
I've been doing that since like my second year of mead making, and I had people tell me that was a good idea, but at the same time I also was thinking you always proof your yeast when you're baking to let to be sure that the yeast is alive. So making a starter is a great way to ensure that your yeast isn't so old that it just went up and died on you and you didn't know it, and and also like AJ says, it gives the yeast a stress-free start so that they can kick right off when you toss them in there. They're like woohoo, and they go to town. So
right,
yeah.
Oh, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but go ahead.
No, I was just a quick aside. I have a callback on your yeast budding comment earlier.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay, so when you look at an electron micrograph of a Saccharomyces yeast, they have the bud scars like you were talking about. The budding in the separation cycle creates an increasing problem because during the fermentation phase of growth is that the cycle depletes the mother's cell membrane by approximately 1/2. So each time the cell membrane is reduced by 1/2. Because the synthesis occurs under aerobic conditions, this limits those asexual replicative cycles. So most fermentations, and I thought this was really interesting, are completed by yeast in the stationary, i.e. non-budding phase.
Yeah, that makes a certain amount of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's after you've got your lag phases while they're breeding like crazy, right? And then after that, they stop breeding, so they're just chewing on the sugar and turning it alcohol.
Yeah, which is why you stir so much during that first third, because they're in an aerobic phase. They need that oxygen, and once you get past the aerobic phase, then you want it to go anaerobic, so you stop stirring. But anyway, sorry. Back. I ran across that and I was like, oh.
Who was that sent that in?
It wasn't anybody that sent it in. I Googled it. I have a black belt in Google Food. You want me to send you the link? I'll drop the link on you, and you can check it out later.
Right. Okay. I just thought, I know there's got to be more people that that don't. There's lurkers on our forum that don't speak up very much. I wish they would. I was wondering who that was. So here's a couple things that, well, we've been going on for pretty long. I think we should probably wrap it up, don't you, instead of continuing? How long have we been on? We started at 7. It's 9 now.
Yeah, we're getting close to our 2-hour point. So, yeah, we probably want to hold this off for next week to finish up.
Yeah, let's do, because then, next week I want to talk about rehydration and talk about lag phases, different phases, and I want to talk about O2 additions. I kind of want that to all be the same information because it all interlocks with each other, and so I think it would be a good place for us to stop right now, and then we can pick those other 3 up and present that all as a family of information that's interlockable with each other.
Yeah, so to summarize the last half hour or so, basically what my take-home message to people is that the less pleasant the environment is, the more yeast you should be pitching, and the less pleasant it is, the more care you should be taking, as in making a starter and that kind of thing with the yeast. So, and that goes from where wine is the most pleasant environment, mead is less pleasant, really high sugar mead is even less pleasant. And so in that regard, just pitch more yeast and you'll be safer.
And that's actually my suggestion. I think it's great to make a starter, but you're still only starting with X amount of moms, right? And so I think, but you're starting with a bigger army once you pitch them in there, but they all came from the same amount of moms. And so my personal feeling there is to throw more moms in to start with.
Yep.
But to be fair, they also started under less stressful conditions than if you'd started them in the must.
That's true, but we're going to talk about
a little farther, and I guess we'll cover that next week.
Yes, because there's some things we can do during rehydration, and particularly with O2 injections or saturation. There's just a couple things we can do when we're making our must and when we're attemperating it. I don't just make my yeast slurry and then toss it in the yeast, because you can do it all perfect up to then and then screw it up by just throwing it in there. We do acclimate it like you were talking about, of putting a little in there, let them get used to now. What happened? The gravity just went up a little bit. The temperature just dropped a little bit because your must is colder than your yeast slurry. So we're getting them used to the gravity. We're getting them used to pH. We're getting them used to the acids and the titratable acids, and also the bricks. And so we're slowly, the example I like to give people is somebody getting into a swimming pool. You know, young dumb yeast are going to jump straight into the swimming pool. But the rest of us are going to go over and sit on the side. We first hang our feet over the side and we get in wet up to our knees, and then we step down on that first little ladder or on the first step, and we get our thighs wet, and then we sit down, and so
first.
Yeah, and then we get down the nether step, and so it's to our chest, and so we're acclimating just like we should acclimate our yeast. And if you do that, you're not going to lose them to temperature shock and gravity shock and all the other things that you can lose your entire slurry to, or most of it, from the very start by doing it wrong. That's why it's really bad to. Well, we'll go into that later. We'll get that next week.
We can go on and on and on.
We will.
Yeah, we will.
Okay, so next week then we'll be covering rehydration and starters and acclimation and perhaps yeast phases if we can get through all of that, because we really only just touched on those today.
Right, and actually O2 additions as well.
Yep.
Yeah. And if you guys that are listening, man, we want to answer your questions, so I wish we were getting more questions from you all. So if you didn't do it tonight, there's all this next week before next week comes around to send them in, however you do that. And we want to answer them for you if we can.
Okay, I'm letting them know where they can send them, or they can just post them right here in the live chat, and we'll pick them up there.
Yep, or the usual Twitter, and
yeah.
Also joining us on the Skype. We got to put a link to that somewhere. Joining us up right on the Skype. That's where